I can't believe my life fell apart in just 4 years. 4 years ago, my wife, Emily, started working at Apex Ventures. Our kids, Jack and Jill, had just turned into teenagers, and Emily was eager to get out of the house. She landed an entry-level secretarial job, which seemed perfect at the time. My name is Blake Sutton, but everyone calls me Skip. I've always been skinny and a bit overweight at times. My parents tried their best to help me bulk up, but nothing worked. Finally, when I hit my teens, they gave up and accepted me as I was. That felt pretty damn good. I was of average height and weighed less than 140 pounds when I finished high school. Many of the skinny guys I went to school with were active in track and field or swimming. Some were excellent cross-country runners. Unfortunately, I had no interest in sports, especially competitive ones. The closest I got to physical activity was in shooting, not trap or skeet shooting, but long-range shooting, which involved a lot of hiking and climbing. I wasn't talking about target shooting, but rather varmint hunting. I was passionate about it throughout high school and college. I spent most of my non-school time either shooting or reloading. After 8 years, I could consistently hit a 2-inch target at 100 yards. My favorite gun was a Marlin 336C chambered in .219 zipper. This cartridge had been discontinued for years, but I made my own out of 30-30 shell casings with a reduced neck. This ability gave me a sense of pride that I desperately needed. During college, 2 important things happened. I met my wife, Emily, and my future business partner, Dave Miller. Other than that, life was pretty dull. I got a degree in geology, got married, and started a small surveying business with Dave. Life was good. Dave and I never worked for anyone else after college. We each invested $500 and started our own small surveying company. We focused on small jobs and real estate deals. We didn't make a lot of money, but we were comfortable. Dave married a local girl 3 months after Emily, and I tied the knot. We supported each other. My family had a cabin, which we called a lodge, in Riverbend County on 160 acres of land. That's where we held all our family gatherings, and it was where I did most of my shooting when I was younger. The Millers had a real cabin on 640 acres in Pine County. Dave and his family hunted there, but didn't use it for much else. That's all you need to know at this point. Like I said, my life started going downhill about 4 years ago. Apex Ventures was a company that designed and manufactured exercise equipment. The company was headquartered in the city, but manufacturing and distribution facilities were scattered across the country. Emily started working there when our twins, Lucy and Lily, went to middle school. It seemed like a good idea at first. The hours were good, the pay was fair, and the location was convenient. The first year or so was perfect. Apex Ventures hired Mark Tyson, a retired NFL quarterback, to be the marketing manager and spokesperson for the company. Unfortunately, my wife worked in the marketing department. For 6 months, we were inundated with stories about the great Mark Tyson. Both my wife and daughters were mesmerized by his charm. Fortunately, after about 6 months, the admiration faded, and around the same time, Emily started working a lot of overtime. Dave and I both grew up in the area, so we knew a lot of people who worked at Apex Ventures. It wasn't hard for us to find out that Emily and Mark Tyson had started dating. While their relationship was blossoming, our marriage was crumbling. As Emily and I grew further apart, so did my relationship with my daughters. I never confronted her about it. She began to leave more often for business and promotional trips. When she came home, she would constantly talk about what she had done, who she had met, and what she had seen. Of course, all of this was for the benefit of the girls. None of it was directed at me. I had turned into nothing. Usually, but not always, she invited me to accompany her to company parties and meetings, where I was ignored for the rest of the evening. Sex was out of the question. How does a man endure such a life? Until Emily started working, our married life was normal. We went out to restaurants regularly, took family trips on weekends, and went on vacation at least once a year. The girls took ballet lessons and played soccer. Emily was active in the Ta and Girl Scouts. We had pizza night every week. The only thing the girls didn't like was spending time at the lodge. That was all in the past. Now, over the past few years, Emily's out-of-town conferences and meetings had gradually increased. Lately, on long trips, she had been taking the girls with her. I was never invited or even asked if I wanted to go. I often overheard the girls talking to their friends about what a great time they had. They never said anything knowing I was within earshot. Mark Tyson was never mentioned, though I knew he was on all those outings. Everything came to a head at the Apex Ventures New Year's Eve party. Emily had a hard time uninviting me. I didn't want to go. The humiliation of having to live with infidelity alone was strong enough. I was afraid I wouldn't be able to control myself if the situation got out of hand. I was right. All of the girls were dressed to the nines. Lucy and Lily were excited because it was their first adult party. I didn't have a tuxedo, so I wore the best suit I had. I even managed to wear the tie I'd gotten for last Father's Day. Several hundred people were milling around when we arrived. "Skip Sutton, glad to see you could make it. Thanks for bringing your wife and beautiful daughters to our little gathering." Mark Tyson seemed to smile, looking at the grimace on my face as he squeezed my hand. Finally, he released it, and I noticed Emily smirking. The girls gave me a look of disgust and quickly walked away. It was the beginning of a bad evening. I drank one mug of beer and huddled in a corner, trying not to embarrass my wife and daughters even more. I didn't say or do anything, but I had successfully ruined the start of the evening for them. Mark Tyson was a big guy, very big. He was at least a foot taller than me and outweighed me by 100 pounds, all muscle. He was the epitome of strength. My daughters mingled around the room, but my wife spent most of the evening by his side. Most of the time, she held lightly onto his arm. Several lower-level men made feeble attempts to strike up a conversation with me, but none of them went anywhere. Several middle and upper-level executives noticed me and smirked or made sly remarks to their companions that seemed to be related to my cuckold status. I couldn't hear the words, but it was obvious what was going on. My beer was replaced with a simple ginger ale, which I sipped slowly, driving myself to a mild frenzy. I was usually able to keep my cool and prided myself on never losing my temper. Many began to dance, and I noticed that the girls were having a good time, and so was my wife, with Tyson, of course. Neither she nor the girls had spoken to me once in the last 3 hours. Of course, I couldn't expect them to spoil a good evening by socializing with a wet blanket. A small mixed group of men and women were chatting away from the dance floor when one of the guys pointed out Emily and Tyson. They looked in my direction, started laughing, and quickly turned away when they saw me looking at them. A few minutes later, they were still giggling. That was the end of my evening. I set my glass down, and as I headed for the door, I noticed Tyson had his hands on my wife's ass, and she was caressing his neck. Before I knew it, she pulled his head down and kissed him right in the middle of the dance floor. It took me less than 5 seconds to cross the room, turn Tyson around, and hit him hard with a roundhouse punch to the right. My arm hurt like hell, and the next thing I knew, I woke up in the back of an ambulance. It wasn't a long ride to the emergency clinic, and I noticed that I was alone in the ambulance. I remember being wheeled into the emergency room. The next thing I remember is that I woke up in some sort of recovery room. 30 minutes into recovery, I was visited by a doctor who gave me an update on my condition. In addition to a broken arm, I had 3 broken ribs, a broken nose, 3 lost teeth, and 2 loose teeth. My jaw was wired shut, and my right kidney was bruised. To finish, Tyson gave me a good kick in the testicles, resulting in blood vessel damage. The doctor said I would be discharged in 4 days, but I would have to spend at least 2 weeks in a rehab center. If I wanted, they could arrange rehab at home. I chose the other option. When my wife and daughters finally showed up, it was past noon. Emily looked furious, and the girls looked bored. No one said anything. Since my jaw was clenched, I was reluctant to start any conversation. I was in no position to talk, but I didn't want her to know it. "Well, Skip, what do you have to say for yourself?" Emily finally broke the silence. I quickly assessed her attitude and decided I didn't need this conversation. Instead of trying to answer her, I just muttered and pointed to my jaw. We sat like that for probably about a minute or so before she started again. "It was embarrassing, Skip. The girls were so humiliated that we had to leave before New Year's Eve. The whole evening was ruined. And for what? I should have known better than to take you out in public. I guarantee nothing like that will ever happen again." She had no idea how right she was. I just sat there staring at her. I couldn't even smile, so I did nothing. They stayed for a few more minutes. Since I didn't react in any way, they finally got up to leave. On the way out, Lucy stopped and looked over her shoulder. "Thanks for doing nothing, Dad." Dave showed up a couple of hours later. We chatted for a few minutes. Yes, I could talk, and then he pulled out the local paper. I made the front page. Local NFL hero protected wife and daughters from abusive father. The article went on to describe how I assaulted my wife while she was dancing at the annual Apex Ventures party on New Year's Eve. Mark Tyson rushed over and subdued me before the officials could drag me away. Not exactly how I remembered it, but that's the story people will believe. Dave and I talked for a couple of hours and discussed several options. After he left, I refused dinner and asked for sleeping pills. I needed a good night's rest. I spent most of the next day being checked, probed, and prodded. All the damage had been discovered and taken care of. Now all I had to do was wait and be treated. One of the hospital staff gave me a list of recommended rehab centers in the area. I chose one near Hamburg. Dave showed up the same evening. I sold him my share of the company for $500. Of course, it was the handshake part of the deal that was important. I was still a part owner, but not on paper. All good things come with time. We had a good laugh at the fact that 1 week of rehab was worth $500. Emily and the girls never saw me again at the hospital. They came back the day after I moved into rehab, and I understand they were very angry that they had not been warned. They were very angry when they arrived at the rehab center and were denied access. I think I was able to specify who could and could not visit when I checked in. One of the orderlies informed me that they were trying to visit me. My ribs hurt like hell when I laughed. The worst part of my injuries was the dental work. Fortunately, they had a dentist who could provide on-site care, but for a fee. I decided to take advantage of that opportunity. The hand injury was not as serious as originally thought. Although I could have left the rehab center a little earlier, I decided to stay for the full 2 weeks. After 10 days, I was able to breathe fully again. It felt good. Emily never tried to visit me again. On the second weekend of February, the National CrossFit Expo was held in Atlantic City. Emily, the girls, Mark Tyson, and the Apex Ventures marketing team attended. Dave and several of our staff spent the weekend moving my clothes and belongings to a lodge in Riverbend County. He made sure to pick up my Marlin and all my reloading supplies. 2 days later, I was comfortably settled into my new abode. That weekend, Dave and his wife, June, came for a visit. Apparently, Emily was at the office looking for me. No funds had been deposited into the joint account since the beginning of the year, and Emily demanded an explanation. Dave spent half an hour trying to explain to her that not only did I no longer own part of the company, but I didn't even work there. She stormed out of the house in frustration, threatening to contact a lawyer. A couple of weeks later, I was functioning quite normally. The jaw situation wasn't as bad as originally thought, so within a couple of days, I was back to eating and drinking normally. The dental problem was resolved, and I decided to leave my broken nose alone. I was missing that little bit of character it was adding. The rest of the bruises and aches were healing normally. I was undergoing treatment and exercising as directed. Dave left me one of the company trucks and a credit card. I also took a large amount of cash with me in case I needed it. I left my cell phone with Dave. The lodge was comfortable, but it was temporary. I'd already gotten my exercise and started jogging at a leisurely pace. Mark Tyson had a large house on Summit Drive, just outside of town. It was a long, winding road going up to Pine Mountain. There weren't many houses there because it was difficult to build on the steep mountainside. Finding a house wasn't difficult, and I was able to find some nice secluded vantage points. I would not be a quiet simpleton. In the mornings, I worked out and got in shape. In the afternoons, I practiced target shooting. This year was a good year for varmints, but I left them alone and focused on inanimate targets. My Bushnell laser rangefinder was showing that I needed to be accurate at 133 yards. I would be ready when I could consistently hit eggs at that distance. I bought a lot of eggs. I bought a suppressor. I spent evenings planning, adapting, and reloading. I limited myself to 1 black and tan a day. I started growing a beard. Dave came to see me once every 2 weeks or so. Emily stopped by the office a few times, still trying to find me. After 2 months, she gave it up. Dave always brought a few newspaper clippings with him. Judging by them, my wife and daughters continued to enjoy the social life with their new benefactor. He must have had it fully maintained by now because I contributed nothing. Strangely, Emily and the girls were still living in our old house, which I didn't realize. It was time to move on. I started driving into town early in the morning to be able to pick a good vantage point to watch Mark's house. Parking was problematic, so I ended up having to walk a bit. He was a creature of habit. I didn't expect such a big guy to take up swimming, but he did 50 laps every morning. Naturally, the pool was heated. That weekend, I made a trip to Pine County. Moving from the lodge to the cabin was quite a challenge. No electricity, no water, no cell phone signal. It was a 45-minute drive to the nearest Walmart store in Owen, New York. I didn't want to drive there in the winter, so I stocked up on everything I needed for at least the next 4 months. If I forgot something or needed something I hadn't thought of, I could buy it before bad weather shut me out of the house. Early Wednesday morning, I drove to the office and moved all the stuff from the truck into my Subaru Outback. I parked the company car at the construction site at the base of the mountain and walked up to my chosen vantage point. There was no traffic on the street at this time. I set up the tripod and set up the canister. I had 1 round in the chamber and 1 in the tube, and had the next 2 at the ready. 20 minutes later, Mark Tyson came out for his morning swim. The first shot shattered his right ankle. Even with a suppressor, it was loud for this early in the morning. 2 seconds later, his left knee shattered. I loaded the next 2 rounds and shattered his left elbow. The last target was his right wrist, which I couldn't hit due to his erratic movements, so I quickly collected the rounds and quietly left. 10 minutes later, I left the construction site and returned to the office to my waiting Subaru. I did not return to the lodge, but drove straight to Pine County. The first thing to do was to clean the spring so that I would have fresh water. Then, a good supply of firewood had to be gathered. Fortunately, the cabin was waterproof and well insulated. LED lanterns were much better and cheaper than the old coal and oil lamps. Soon, everything was under control, and I started shooting again, this time at paper targets. I first saw her in the middle of the second week, a tall, lanky woman dressed in jeans, a flannel shirt, and a vest. Although she was far away, I could see she had a backpack or something on her back. She walked past on an old logging trail that ran next to an open area used for a shooting range. 640 acres of land, and I still hadn't gotten any privacy. Of course, it was much more practical to build a cabin by the road where materials could be brought in, and the acreage was for deer and the occasional bear. One day, when I had the opportunity, I put a scope on her. She had a crossbow slung over her shoulder. I had no idea what she was doing with it, but I was curious. The range had a small area for a campfire and barbecue, so I started taking an old galvanized coffee pot and cookies. Yes, I was getting pretty good at biscuits. I felt like I was setting some kind of trap. 3 days later, my trap went off. "Excuse me, my name is Claire. I was hoping we could talk." She caught me off guard. Not being very socially savvy, I stuttered a bit, so I gestured for her to sit down. "Would you like some coffee?" It was the best I could do. She nodded, smiled, and took the crossbow off her shoulder before sitting down. "My name's Skip. I got here about 2 weeks ago. I've noticed you around the neighborhood a few times. I'm staying in a cabin about a mile down the road. I try to walk every day and usually end up in this neighborhood." I held out one of my famous cookies to her. "Are you here for long?" "I'll be here for the rest of the summer. Are you on your own?" "It's open 4 or 5 months at least." She seemed to like my biscuit, but I got the feeling she would have preferred cream and sugar in her coffee. She didn't say anything. I just caught it. "Do you own this place?" "No, it belongs to a friend of mine who lets me use it." For a few moments, we sat in silence. "Do you hunt?" "No, not really. I used to shoot varmints a little, but I haven't done that for a few years now. Now I just do a little target shooting." "I don't mean to be intrusive, but would you mind if I practiced at your shooting range? I haven't found any suitable places where I can use my bow." She had an accent I couldn't identify, either English, Australian, or Scottish. I didn't want to ask. "No, not at all. I think we can find something suitable for target shooting. Feel free to use it anytime." She ate the second cookie. I was feeling pretty good about myself. "I'm just curious. I thought most people use compound bows nowadays, and you have a bow, and it looks new." "Don't get me started. Take my word for it, the recurve is better." She used regular bolts for target shooting, but always carried 4 hunting shafts mounted on her bow. That evening, I drove a few miles down the road and picked up 3 bales of hay. Thus began my summer with Claire Charles. Claire came every day and returned to her lodge every evening. The lodge staff put a beacon on her cell phone, so they would always know where she was. If Claire did not return to the lodge, they would send someone to look for her. It was an arrangement she had set up when she arrived, and it seemed to work out great. It was the beginning of our second week together when a heavy summer squall hit us. We were sitting on the porch of the cabin, laughing and bantering about her dilemma. Without saying anything, she pulled out her cell phone and called the lodge. She informed them that due to inclement weather, she would not be able to return this evening, and that she had found a comfortable place to stay for the night. I was both surprised and delighted. Thus, my platonic relationship with Claire Charles developed into an intimate one. From that point on, we began to alternate lodging locations. The Highlands Lodge was totally out of place in Pine County. It was posh, very expensive, and considered an improvement over the Pocono Mountains. Most of the guests came from out of town. Claire's family was originally from Cornwall. The Highlands had hot showers, sumptuous dining, and laundry facilities, which I took full advantage of. Sex in the wild is fun, but it's much nicer when you have facilities. We spent less and less time on the range. A couple of weeks later, while Claire and I were having lunch, Dave and June arrived. June seemed especially excited to have a companion, and even more excited when she realized it was a full relationship. We chatted lightly for the first few hours, and then June and Claire went off to chat with the girls. Dave thought it was funny that Claire liked warm beer, and I had to drink cold beer. I had to go to the spring for more several times. After Mark Tyson's tragic attack, I became the first suspect. There was a bigger problem for Mark than he realized. The press wanted to know why I was the person of primary interest. The more they looked into it, the worse it got for Mark and my wife. Although the main goal was to find me, the press quickly switched to the relationship between Mark and my wife. 3 weeks later, Mark Tyson was no longer a representative of Apex Ventures. Police visited the lodge in Riverbend County and found it empty. They had no leads on credit cards, no leads on phone calls, and no idea where I might be. They never asked Dave about the cabin. Dave mentioned that Emily had stopped by the office several times in a vain attempt to find out where I was. It seemed she was desperate, as her source of money was starting to dry up. According to Dave, Mark seemed to have lost interest in her and blamed her for his demise. I didn't have a plan of how to proceed. I couldn't go back, and I had no other options I wanted to explore. At that point, I was adrift. As I approached the end of the year, I found myself calming down. I was happy and content with Claire, but I needed to turn my attention to my real life. It was a brisk fall day, and I was alone in the cabin. Something was wrong, but I couldn't figure out what it was. I had just had time to melt the wood stove to normal and start making coffee when the door suddenly swung open. Mark Tyson was as big and as ugly as the last time I'd seen him. He stood in the doorway with a wide grin on his face and an old .38 caliber police pistol in his right hand. He seemed to be standing unsteadily and holding his left arm at a strange angle as if trying to keep his balance. We just stood there, looking at each other. I expected some profound words of revenge, but nothing came. "Coffee, bastard? I spent over $10,000 to find you." "No, I don't want any damn coffee." "Well, what can I do for you?" "I know it was you, you sneaky weasel. Your wife told me you're a frequent target shooter. I hope you have 911 service here because you're going to need it." As he spoke, his face became increasingly puffy and red. He seemed to be in some kind of rage. Suddenly, a shocked expression appeared on his face. He dropped the gun and dropped to one knee. Mark Tyson rolled across the floor, howling at the top of his lungs. There was about 12 inches of crossbow bolt sticking out of his left buttock. The other 6 inches were deeply and firmly buried. Claire just stood in the doorway and smiled. We ran most of the way back to the Highlands. I didn't take anything with me from the cabin. It took Claire about 15 minutes to load all her stuff into the rented Land Rover. The whole time we were laughing like a couple of school kids. When we got to the US 80 freeway, we finally calmed down to a fairly normal state of mind. Breakfast was soothing and hearty. I assume he's already retrieved the arrow and made it to the treatment facility. I don't think so. He should call 911. I shot him with one of the 3-bladed hunting bolts. It has to be cut out. He can't be pulled out. He'll probably have to lie on his stomach on a gurney when he goes to the emergency room. That must be uncomfortable. Well, Miss Claire, it looks like we're in big trouble now, and it's all your fault. She threw a forkful of scrambled eggs at me and laughed. After breakfast, I called Dave, and Claire called someone else. I brought him up to speed, and he seemed to think it was pretty funny. I told him that we were going to Ocala, Florida, where my grandparents live. He snickered slightly because he knew I only said that to cover my ass. While I was on the phone, Claire walked over and pulled my wallet out of my pocket. She returned to her seat and continued talking while I shopped for items for our trip. What trip? I didn't know, but we had to go somewhere. For some reason, I felt like Claire had a plan. She didn't tell me anything, and I didn't ask. I contented myself with my ignorance and trusted her. It had been a long day. We finally checked into a beautiful bed and breakfast in the Wisconsin Dells. We were exhausted from the trip and just fell asleep. Breakfast was great, and 4 hours later, we were at the Walmart supermarket in Duluth. Claire still had all her stuff, but I was left with nothing. I still didn't know what she was up to, and she seemed to be having fun keeping me in the dark. I got something like a new closet, and Claire got a big bag of snacks. Ever since I was a kid, I had dreamed of taking a canoe trip on the Boundary Waters. I finally managed to make it happen. When we arrived, everything was already set up. The company had even taken care of Claire's rental car. This made me realize that we probably wouldn't be going back. It was intriguing and exciting. I couldn't wait to see what else she had in store for me. Before we hit the road, I made one last call to Dave. "Skip, what the hell did you do? It's all over the news here about Tyson's latest demise. Some of the national services have even picked it up." "Dave, I have no idea what you're talking about." I could hear June laughing in the background. "Well, his image in the media is dropping like a rock. He can't seem to do anything right. It couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. I've always wanted to say that. By the way, Skip, nice move with the divorce. Emily wasn't expecting it, and it hit her hard. I don't know how you did it from there, but it seems to have worked. She has no idea what she's going to do, and she doesn't have the money to do it." "Dave, trust me, I'm not kidding. I have no idea what the hell you're talking about. I haven't even gone to a lawyer. Are you sure about the divorce?" "Yes, she waved it in my face and ranted about it just this morning." "Well, it's nice to get some good news for a change. By the way, could you stop by the cabin and have someone pick up my stuff in the car? Claire's still there." "No problem. Where are you located now?" "In Moss Bluff, Florida. I'm looking for a trailer to rent." Claire stood on the dock and waved at me. The canoe was loaded to capacity. I thanked my parents for making me go to Boy Scout camp when I was younger. At least I didn't feel like a total dummy. For the next 6 days, we sailed around the lakes of the Boundary Waters. We had a different campsite each night. Claire knew where she was going and used her cell phone's GPS to get there. I was along for the ride and enjoyed the journey. The best part of the trip was that she enjoyed sex under the stars as much as I did. The next day, our adventures continued. A lone man met us at a small dock on a remote road. Claire and he began hugging and talking in French. After 30 minutes or so, he handed Claire the keys to a truck and a large envelope. We unloaded our stuff from the canoe and headed down the road. I looked out the back window and saw him pull away from the dock. I got behind the wheel and Claire started going through the envelope. "I guess I better get used to calling you Clinton." Sure enough. I threw her a strange look. She laughed and handed me a Canadian driver's license with my picture on it. The name Clinton Barfield was written on the license. "You're kidding, right?" "No, you are now Clinton Barfield, and you also have a new Canadian passport." She waved it proudly in front of my face. "We're in Canada, of course." Silly. 4 days later, we landed in New Quay. 2 hours later, we were at Claire's family home near St. Austell. It was as if I had been born here. I felt comfortable and satisfied. I was still very nervous before meeting Claire's family. The estate was huge. Her father asked me to go into the living room. There was an elaborate walnut wood armoire against the far wall. I watched with interest as he reached inside and pulled out a rifle. He held it out to me and smiled. It was my Marlin 336C chambered in 219 zipper. I realized I was back home. I never saw or heard from Emily or the girls again. Dave and June received a strange Christmas card every year from Mr. and Mrs. Clinton Barfield. They had no idea what it was about. This year's card will have a picture of us with our 3 kids on it. I'm sure he'll figure it out. Did Mark Tyson ever exist?